I believe. You might have to turn down your volume also, I think.
Okay.
Can you hear my?
Is that better?
Turn down your volume also. I have to turn down my.
Okay.
Can you hear my?
Okay. Is that better?
No. Turn down your volume also. I have to turn down my.
Okay.
No, I don't think so. Because now you can't hear me at all, can you?
I can hear you a little bit.
There we go. Hold on. Can you hear me?
I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. There we go. Hold on. Can you? There we go. All right. We should be straight now. That's my apologies.
Okay.
It opens up YouTube, but it can't open up YouTube. There we go. All right. I think we should be straight.
Cool.
What's up, y'all? Give us a second. I don't bring people on often enough to have worked through these technical issues. But if you would indulge me a moment. I'm just trying to bring up. There we go. All right. What's good, y'all? What's good? It's your girl, Jice Johnson with the Black Business Initiative. So I got my boy on here, H Soul, and I just want to, we're going to talk about Black education. So there we go. That's mine, I think. All right. We're going to talk about Black Education Matters. And before I bring him on to just introduce himself, y'all know what it is. I got a few plugs I need to throw out there. So you guys, we have the Black Agenda coming up. Listen, all 7 cities are open now. I know we had some hiccups. I know we were working through it. And I appreciate everybody who has been patient, but you can now go onto the BlackAgendaOnTour.com. And for Denver, Chicago, DC, Atlanta, Brooklyn, Houston, and Oakland, you can go in and get your tickets. So make sure that you go in and get your tickets. Many of those cities still have early bird tickets going. I think every city except for Denver still has early bird tickets going. So make sure that you go over there and take care of that. Remember to text 484848. Remember to text Black Agenda to 484848. And you can also go to the BlackAgendaOnTour.com and sign up for our email list in order to stay in touch there. I wanted to just throw out here, I want to shout out to some of my Patreon members, in particular, my high-level members. I want to shout out my homie Greg. So he supports me through everything. This is one of my dopest friends through the military, and we've just stayed friends ever since. So shout out to you, Greg, and Angela. Also shout out to LeBaron. And I hope I'm pronouncing this right because I have practiced this name, but I think it is Amanda. Nope, it's not Amanda. Look, I practiced it and I still messed it up. I think it is Amade. I think it is Amade Bay. I'm not sure, but I think it's a sister. Peace, sis, if that's you. But I just wanted to give you guys some shout outs over here, and make sure that you head over to Patreon at Grind with Jice. That platform is growing, and so I'm very excited about that. So now we're going to talk about education, y'all. So y'all know it might have been a couple months ago now that me and my girl Michi, we got on here and we started talking about our homeschool situation. And we started talking about homeschool because a lot of us are not happy with the school system, right? And so we kind of know that we're sending our kids into this system that is by and large abusive. It is, a system that's miseducating us. And it's a system that is difficult for, us to figure out what the strategy is, because of course, you know, we work and we got to figure out where we're putting our kids throughout the day, and you know, all of those things, right? It's a complicated situation, and you have some people who want to fix the system, right? And then you have some people who want to dismantle the system, and you have some people who want to build your own. You have some people like me who've just said fuck it, and I just pull my kids out and I just ain't dealing with it, right? So, but one way or another, we have to figure out and start looking at the type of solutions that we need, and really having a better understanding as well of the problems that we face inside of our school system. So, my boy here, H Soul, he's got some great shit going on. His organization, Our Voice, Our Schools, has really been doing some work on the ground here locally in Denver. And I just wanted him to kind of start sharing, you know, a little bit about what he's doing, what's worked, what hasn't worked, some of the victories, some of the losses, and let's have this conversation, right? Because we get a lot of questions around children, we get a lot of questions around schooling, and if you want to address the school situation in your home, or maybe you're here locally in Denver and you're not quite sure where to plug in, you know, here's some areas where you can plug in, or here's some things you can begin to do inside of your home. So I want to make sure that I, you know, remind you to subscribe, but also, you know, take a moment, please, and share out this live stream, and let's get some people on here who are really, you know, want to dig into the education piece. So H, I'm gonna just turn it over to you. I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, and then, you know, let's talk this education piece.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, Jice, thank you for, you know, inviting me on to your platform. You've been very supportive of not only Our Voice, Our Schools, but of myself personally, as I've gone through the various iterations of my activism to where I am now. So shouts out to you and everything that you're doing. It's good to be here. Secondly, so my name is Hasira, so Ashemu. I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. I left Denver and attended Howard University, and from Howard University, I moved to Ghana, West Africa, where I lived and raised my children for 10 years while I was working with the African Union, making sure that the diaspora was considered the fifth region, which we won back in 2006. So I returned to the United States in 2011. And during that time, it was right at the beginning of, well, it was just starting to swell up. And then in 2013, the Black Lives Matter movement started. Became involved with that while working out in Los Angeles. And then really got deep into education justice around 2015, around issues. And the way that I came into education justice was not as an educator, but it was more so through the lens of a community organizer, meaning that I got into education justice because of two pieces of media that one that my father gave me, and the other that a really good friend of mine who was one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement turned me on to. And those two pieces were the new Jim Crow, which talks about the criminalization of Black bodies inside of America, and the for-profit and its trajectory since slavery. And the second piece of media was the documentary The 13th, which talks about, again, the criminalization of Black bodies. And so one of the key pieces that I felt was missing from both of those seminal works were the criminalization. Where does the criminalization begin? And if you understand or examine the preschool to prison pipeline, you know that criminalization begins inside of schools. And so that is how I became involved in education justice, was to eradicate the criminalization of Black bodies inside of the schooling system at its origin point. And so I consider myself an education abolitionist, and I'm engaged in the work of freedom fighting inside of public education, as I see public education as the great, and has always been the great equalizer for Black people in this country.
So tell me, like, I think that kind of gives the paradigm from where you're coming from. when you decided that this was something that you were going to take on, and I'm not even 100% sure like where I came in inside of your journey, right? I know that we had started with like breaking our chains that evolved. And so at that point, that was something where we were kind of talking about, some Saturday school and some just education justice, kind of conversation. But, going from there, like when you really started attacking the school system itself, or at least I would say the school district, here in Denver, like when you started attacking DPS, kind of where was that starting point where you saw what was happening inside of the schools? And feel free to elaborate like what you saw that said this now requires like action. But then also kind of get into like what were some of those initial starting points where you're like, what do I do first, right? Because I think that that's where a lot of people struggle in that question is, what do I do first? If this is something that I want to take on, if I don't like what's happening to me, if I don't like what's happening to my children, what do I do first?
Right. So one of the things that precipitated breaking our chains, forming the Our Voice, Our Schools coalition is that there was a firing of a principal, or a push out of a particular principal of Manual High School in the form. His name is Nick Dawkins, and Nick Dawkins was the principal, a brother of a principal of Manual High School for 3 years. He had succeeded in raising test scores. He had succeeded in engaging his student body, which was predominantly Black and brown, on a level that is rarely seen inside of the Denver public school system. And he was summarily pushed out and undermined in that process. And so my entry point into engaging the Denver public school systems is the same, was really the same entry point that most people have when they're dealing with the education system, is when something happens to their child, right? Or something happens to a teacher that is beloved to them, or a principal or administrator. And so we began our activism around addressing the school board and the administration around their behavior. And here in Denver, we had what was called the Bailey Report. The Bailey Report lays out all of the infractions that occur on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis with Black students, with Black parents, with Black educators and Black administrators. And so we began to advocate around Nick Dawkins and getting him back in the building, making sure that this wasn't something that continued to happen. But of course, what was happening to Nick Dawkins was a part of a national trend where white people at this point in time are starting to take over or retake over and re-gentrify the urban centers. So this is why you can go to Chicago, you can go to DC, you can go to DC and go on Northwest or Georgia Avenue, and now it's all white. You can go to Chicago and you see that places that used to be all Black are now all white. New York, Brooklyn, all these places are being re-gentrified, right? Oakland. And so with these, this is part of what's happening in Denver is part of a national trend where Europeans, white folks, have now made the decision, the strategic decision to re-enter into urban areas and re-gentrify them and take over the cities. Whereas we saw in the 80s and 90s that it was just the opposite. It was white flight, and they were moving out into suburbia. And so as a result of them retaking over the urban centers, what you have is a tension between what happens to the schools in those process where it used to be Black schools, and now you have Black schools surrounded by white folks, and ultimately white folks want those schools back. And so it's putting it in a national lens, that fight looked like inside of Manual High School, which Manual rests in the zip code of 80205, which is the 13th fastest gentrifying zip code in the country. So what was happening with Manual was part and parcel of what was happening nationally with all the re-gentrification. It happened at Manual because, as you know, Denver made weed legal. And so it's on and cracking here. Black folks can barely afford to live in the city.
So the issues that I see, I mean, even just with that, like, basically they was already treating us fucked up in the school, but now they want the school. So they're trying to really come in and have a higher level of assault in order to shut down and take over the schools, right?
Right.
I mean, that's kind of what we're saying.
So let me give you a perfect example of that, Jice. It's called manufactured crisis. So 4 months ago, I was in New Orleans, and New Orleans shut down its last public school. Now, let me say that again. The city of New Orleans shut down its last public school, meaning New Orleans is the only city in the United States as of today that has no public schools. It's 100% charter schools inside of New Orleans.
Really? And I thought, so that didn't happen to Detroit? I thought Detroit. No. Okay, so there's still some public schools over there in Detroit?
There are still some public schools in Detroit, although not many, right? So just like there's not many inside of Northeast Denver and Southwest Denver. But no, New Orleans is the only city in the United States as of 4 months ago to have an all charter school, no public schools there. And so, of course, this again too is the trend inside of urban districts, Black and brown areas, and so that's part of what we're fighting. It's a huge part of what we're fighting against, as far as maintaining these buildings and occupying these spaces that were traditionally our neighborhoods, but are at a very high rate being ethnic. And people use the word gentrifying. I don't think gentrification does it's a pretty word for ethnic cleansing. So it's kind of like what they do inside of corporate America, right? Where you have the word implicit bias. Implicit bias training takes the place of racist. These people have implicit biases. They use that word so that they don't have to use racist. So implicit bias is to racist what gentrification is to the real reality, which is ethnic cleansing. And that's what we're dealing with in these districts.
And just for anybody who's not like really familiar, because I think when we're saying like, this is just my opinion, maybe not, I don't know, y'all can tell me, but I feel like when we're saying that, the schools are charter schools, like for some people, what does that, I mean, can you just break that down real quick? Like what does that mean, right? There's no public school, the school is charter. So obviously that's not like a private school. And maybe some of you guys know, but just kind of,
that's a good point.
Break that down. Like, what does that mean?
So there's three types of models of schools that now exist primarily. You have private schools, which are 100% done by individual tuition to the school. You have charter schools, or let me go the other way, traditional schools, which are public schools, or what we know as public schools, which are 100% funded by the public, which through taxes and whatnot. Then you have what is called charter schools, and charter schools are private entities that receive public dollars to run their schools. And so charter schools have their own private boards. Then they receive tax dollars, but unlike traditional schools, they have private boards that we don't get to vote who's on that board. And most of the time, the people that are on that board are business folks. They're not educators. They're people in the lines of business. So that's where you get your kick.
So,
Does that make sense?
so this is basically like private people trying to run public school, or trying to run basically a public school, right? Because for the most part, like they have to accept the kids, right? They're getting the public funding. They're getting money from the state, or I don't.
But no, but they don't have to accept the kids, and that's the thing about charter schools. Charter schools get to pick and choose which kids they accept, whereas public schools, truly public schools, can't pick and choose what students that they get. Charter schools can say, listen, and this is true throughout charters all around the country. They can say that we don't want children who have IEPs or have been on IEPs. We don't want children who have disabilities because they're more expensive to educate. So they could, whereas a traditional school can't say that they can't do those things.
But when a city shuts down all the public schools, then where does, so like, for example, maybe there's no like precedent for this if this is the first city that's done this, but if they shut down all the schools that are public schools, and then you have a disabled child, or you have a child who has been on, and I don't know if IEP is like a national term, or if IEP is, something more specific to Denver, but if you have a child who's on basically it's like an individual education plan or something like that, right? So if you have a child who's like on that type of a situation and they decide, I don't want you in my school, what is the option then for a family who has that situation? Or
right. Yes.
right. The right is there's no option like that.
That's right.
Okay. So we obviously know, New Orleans is like one, that's one of our cities, right?
That's right.
So I mean, I'm assuming that you're following this, and then if not, if this is like out of your realm or whatever, we can move on. But is what's happening in that type of a scenario, right? Are we finding that there are children that just are flat out displaced at this point, or do we not yet know like what that's looking like?
So that's just the thing. It's the most vulnerable students inside of any system are being displaced. So that's Black children. That's poor children with disabilities are the ones that are being displaced and unserved inside of these systems. The most vulnerable population amongst us.
I literally have like no words, because I think that for a service, well, and then here's the thing, right? Is it still where it's illegal to not send your kid to school, right? Like,
so yes, it is. It's still mandatory.
Like, you have to legally send your child to school. Even when we homeschool, right? We let people know. Like, there have been parents that have come to me and said, "Well, I just took my kid out the school system," and I'm like, "No, sis, don't do that, because they can call truancy on you. That's a problem. So you can't just pull your child out the school system." My children are registered, or at least my oldest are. I have preschoolers too, but my oldest daughter, who is school age, is registered in the school system. And then I have told the school system that I'm homeschooling her. But at any point, if the school district were to call me and say, we want to see her attendance records or her grades or whatever the case might be, I need to be able to produce documentation that shows that she is in some form of active schooling, right?
Right.
That way they cannot come and like call child protective services on me. They cannot, any of those situations, right? So now, if I'm hearing you correctly, where we are headed to as we are moving into basically this privatized school system is a system that says, I don't have to let you in my school. I do get to still get funding from the government. And on top of that, the government is still saying that you have to send your child to school, but you may not have a school that you can send your child to. And then what is the anticipation of what that looks like, or what's to come from that? This is like a population situation.
So then what happens is you have the popularization and the pushing of what is called online schools, where you can set your child in front of a computer for 8 hours a day and educate them that way. All right. And so they become plugged into the matrix through that ways and means. And let's be very clear.
And there's a place for them to go and do this, or now we're providing internet services and we're providing computers, and we're expecting that parents are going to figure out how to stay home, because one thing potentially, if you have a high school kid, right? But a high school kid, I mean, even then, like a high school kid with a disability, a high school kid with potentially a behavioral issue, like what are we really, And I'm not saying you have, obviously you don't have all the answers, like this is a conundrum, but I think that this is the type of shit that we need to know and understand, like what's happening with this charter school movement. Because somebody dropped in here, like she said Roland Martin is a spearhead for charter schools, right? And I haven't really paid attention to Roland Martin in this particular conversation. And so, like, sis, you have me like, now I want to go and look up what Roland Martin's stance is, and I want to kind of play devil's advocate, not for like an all charter school situation, but if we recognize that the public school is not this institution or the systems for us, then it's kind of like, okay, well, let's build our own schools, right? So if we build our own schools, essentially we're building our own charter school, right? Is that what
so
I mean?
So this is where the conversation gets convoluted, and you have to really be a student of the environment in order to really be able to dissect and ascertain what's taking place. You have several key Black figures that are proponents of charter schools. You have people like Cory Booker, who's now a presidential candidate, who is a huge proponent of charter schools. And so what you will find, and this is what I need our people to pay attention to, that you have to break this issue down to its very last compound in order to really understand what's taking place. Because the crisis in public education, the traditional school model, is a manufactured crisis, meaning that if you properly fund public education, if you treat it equitably, if it's done equitably, then public education works for the greater good, and it's always worked for the greater good for general society. When this is absolutely true for white people. White people's public education is fantastic when all the environments that they operate in are white. For instance, this is shown when United States is number 13 in education, but when you take away the inequity that exists in public education, they're number 3, which means they're more than capable and they know how to educate children publicly. What they don't or refuse to do publicly is educate Black children publicly. So that's the issue. So then there's this frustration that builds up between Black families inside of traditional public education models, saying, listen, public education it has its serious issues, right? But so the reason why they're saying that is because the inequities that exist inside of public education are created by privatizers, people who are trying to manufacture a crisis to give it a reason to fail so that they can take it over and offer an antidote. I think Chris Rock talks about this as far as the money is to be made in the habit, not in the solution to the habit, which is why you still have cancer and all these, like, he says they're never going to find a cure for cancer because the money is in the comeback. And so that trueness exists inside of public education. The reason why they continue to create manufactured crisis inside of public education is so that they can create a charter alternative where you are paying white people privately to fund these alternatives. So it's all game. It's all game.
And it frustrates me because essentially, again, this is like like what I think we really fail to understand in America all the time. And I feel like we talk. It almost feels like this conspiracy type of thing, right? Like the system is like out to get us, but for real, the system is out to get us, right? Because this is a capitalistic society, which means that our policy is undergirding things that are going to allow for the privatization of, for you to be able to make your money, right? And so this is an opportunity essentially for you to make money off of something that is basically legislated that has to happen. So legislation says that you have to send your children to school, right? That didn't always used to be. You could have, kids used to not have to be in the school system, and they can come home and they can help you work your land or work your business or whatever. But now kids have to be inside the school system. And so now they're basically, making it to where where they're able to capitalize off of that. And they're creating policy and legislation to support the capitalization of the education system, which they are forcing you to participate in.
Exactly. You exactly just hit the nail on the head, right? So we have to ask ourselves, why is public education mandated, meaning that you could be criminalized unless you participate in it, but public health care is not, right? It's not mandated that you are taken care of if you go into a doctor's office and are sick, right? They want their money.
Right.
So this is a money game where you have to understand that the way that they have set it up is through manufactured crisis. It has been said by Arne Duncan, which was one of the architects of the charter school movement, that the best thing that ever happened to New Orleans was Katrina. Think about that.
Yeah, I bet.
Right? Because now you have a crisis.
Right.
Now you ain't got to gentrify the city the slow way that they had to do Denver and Chicago and New York.
Right, because everything just came in and it was leveled, and now you can just rebuild.
That's
and,
right.
Basically price us out of the rebuilding process.
That's right. And that's why New Orleans is the first city to become all charter, because the natural disaster. But believe you me, there are other cities that are well on their way to becoming all charter through manufactured disaster. Denver, in its Black areas of town, are evidence of that. In the Black areas of Denver, the Northeast, 68% of the schools inside of Northeast Denver are charter. 70% of the schools in Southwest Denver that are mostly Chicano Latinx are charter. That's by design. Charter schools are meant for us, whereas traditional and private schools are meant for the wealthy and well-to-do.
So now kind of go through, some more of that journey or whatever. So at this point, it's been where they successfully removed Nick Dawkins, right? And then there was some fallout from that. And then I might be skipping some steps in here, but essentially that kind of took a turn where you guys started really targeting Tom Boasberg, the superintendent, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was a successful thing initially, right? So Tom Boasberg, I think he stepped down, right? And I think that was kind of under a lot of the heat and pressure. So I mean, kind of walk through, you want to walk through.
So what we're really talking about, Jice, and what we're alluding to is getting Black parent involvement, right? And here, the thing about it is, lots of Black parents are not involved inside of their children's education, not because they don't care about it, which is the assumption, and the incorrect assumption, I might add. Right, because here's the thing. You cannot tell Black people that they don't care about education when we're the only group of people in this country that have fought to and died and sent children across picket lines being spat at by adults in order to achieve public education. White folks ain't never had to do that in order to get an education. Black folks have proven what their dedication is to education. We were so dedicated
that's important to highlight there, like even just for a second, because sometimes we don't see each other, we don't see ourselves, in the right type of light, right? And I think that that's important to even highlight, because, and I don't have these statistics exactly right, but I remember, essentially, if we can remember, if our DNA can remember that at one point, it was illegal for us to read. But
that's right.
A lot of poor people who couldn't read, right? So white people couldn't read. Black folks, obviously, we couldn't read, but there were, other immigrants who also couldn't read. And then, if we look at the literacy rates, there was some data that was out there that basically stated that African Americans who are, so let's say ADOS, right, American Descendants of Slavery, they achieved the fastest or the fastest literacy rate of all of them, right? And so once we have that ability where that hindrance was removed off of us, I mean, we read quickly. like we caught up really fast, right? And I think that sometimes, you know, it's that propaganda piece, and I always come back to that propaganda that tells us that we are lazy or dumb, or we don't care about this and we don't care about that, and we think we don't care about those things.
That's
when
right.
Statistically, that's statistically and historically, that's not even
That's
accurate.
right. That's right. You hit the nail on the head. There's nothing else for me to say. We can stop the show now. No, you're absolutely right. What you just said is the essential. You're absolutely right. And
so I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to like point that out, because that's a propaganda piece, and we have to keep pointing out propaganda every time we see it. That's propaganda. That's not reality, you know. So I just want to point that out. So keep it going.
and that's a key point to make, right? Because there's the history, and then there's the white telling of who we are, right? The projection of who we are, and what we're seeing now is that a lot of us are starting to believe the hype around what Black people feel about education. Unfortunately, a lot of the white educators believe that because they're susceptible to that, because they're not in communities that are taught history correctly. And so they don't know that Black people, like you said, risk their life and limb just to learn how to read, which shows you how important education is and has always been for Black people. But what you have now is Black people who are disengaging from the school systems because of trauma, their own trauma of having dealt with what it was like for them to be in school, their distrust for the schooling systems themselves, because white people predominate inside of them. They know that they themselves could have been criminalized and stigmatized inside of these school systems. And so a lot of times you do have Black people that are disengaging, but we have to understand that disengagement is directly rooted in Brown versus Board of Education. And why do I say that is directly rooted there? Because up until that point, Black people were being taught by Black people. Right? If Brown versus Board took Black students, put them in white schools, and got rid of Black educators. So while Black students were integrated into public education, Black educators were left and marginalized, not brought along. And so that is when we started to experience high levels of trauma inside of the public education system. And that is where the distrust for us built up, where we didn't engage those systems. Even though we hoped for the best, that our children could get the best inside of the systems, we ourselves knew that it was a hostile environment that we were sending our children into. And this has been perpetuated now for 2 or 3 generations.
Right. And so, you know, I follow Malcolm X, right? My enemy is not educating my child, but I get that that's not always the option for everybody. And that's kind of why, really, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because like I said, you know, me and Michi X, like we homeschool our children, but we also get a lot of people, and Michi, if she's still in the chat, you know, she could add into this, but we get a lot of people who, you know, are like, I don't know, you know, I can't, I work, like, how do I do that, right? And so one of our goals is to talk about some of those alternative methods to homeschooling, and, you know, ways that it can look a little bit more untraditional. And so we're going to come back on and do, you know, a 3rd segment. We've actually done 2 segments on homeschooling at this point, because there was so much, so many questions, and, you know, so much like buzz kind of around, you know, what does that look like, right? But and for me, that kind of goes hand in hand with the entrepreneurship piece, because although yes, I work from home, so that kind of helps and aids me in homeschooling, I still work from home. So when you have little ones running around, you know, that's not always the easiest thing, right? So if anyone's ever been on the phone with me and you hear it screaming in my background, hey, it is what it is.
Part of the hustle.
But I think that it's really important for us to recognize that. And I think that there are other, like, I think, because and I know it's so many different issues to this, right? Because somebody in the chat just mentioned, I had all Black teachers until I entered high school, right? And so, you know, there's a few comments in here around just like Black teachers. And that situation, I feel like, is almost a direct issue with Teach for America, right? I really feel like they need to like be removed, right? But again, this kind of like, I don't know who's attacking Teach for America, but Teach for America keeps talking about they don't have like quality Black teachers, right? And that's just not accurate. Like they're not hiring and pulling, you know, Black teachers into the system. Now, I don't know Teach for America. I know Teach for America helps to hire out here. I don't know if that's like, again, a nationwide thing. And you guys can
It
like
is.
tell us where you're from, because I don't know where some of you are, you know, coming from. And if these are some of your same experiences. So, you know, while he's talking, I'm monitoring what's going on over here in the chat, if there are like questions and things like that. But
so let me address the Teach for America piece real quick.
Okay.
Teach for America was designed by some rich white kids or graduates and people who were looking to turn a buck and play paternalistic educator. If you can imagine Dangerous Minds, Michelle Pfeiffer. This is who Teach for America was created out of the mindset that we will forgive 2 years. If you teach in an urban district for 2 years, then we'll forgive your debt, your college tuition debt, right? And so what you had was this idea that if you took the best and the brightest, because TFA started in Ivy League schools, that's who they were pulling, were these really smart, quote unquote, white kids who wanted to get back to urban areas and do the Dangerous Minds, Michelle Pfeiffer, save a Black Hispanic child from gangs or whatever, for 2 years, get your tuition wiped out, and then you move on. And that's why you find TFA teachers and schools now inside of urban districts that have Black leaders or brown leaders don't want TFA in the building, in the sense that they know that those teachers are only going to be there for 2 years and then they're out, right? Whereas Miss Jenkins is likely to stay inside the school for 25, 30, 40.
And let me add to that though, because they're not hiring the Black teachers, right? So what's really happening is you got Becky who's getting her student loans wiped out, but you're not, like, our student loans aren't getting wiped out, right? So that's like another economic piece or another economic layer that says, come in here and give some charity work to these poor Black folks or these poor brown folks. And then you're out of here, and you're out of here basically debt free, so you can move on with life. But when we have quality and qualified Black teachers coming in, they're not getting those same opportunities, and they're also not getting into those schools where they can help relate to our children and add that representation in there as well. So I think that's important, because when we start talking about those pull yourself up by your bootstraps bullshit that we get, that's coming from a space of, we have to keep remembering. And I always have to talk about this from an economic standpoint. If they did not get to, like, this chasm that exists in the wealth gap, they did not get there on their own, right? This is just another program that was implemented that gives them a leg up, and that basically pushes us and oppresses us. So we're not only, now there's a hiring gap with teachers in that area, right? And there's pay gaps with teachers in that area. And then now we're separating who's getting that extra jump on their wealth, or being able to obtain wealth, or being able to, buy a home or make those purchases, because they're getting relief of a burden that our Black, teachers are not.
So we have to understand, and you're absolutely right, but we have to understand what is the system's push behind pushing TFA. Well, TFA was put in to destroy unions. Why was it important to destroy unions? Because Black people are, by and large, the most prominent members. Black people are more likely to be a part of the union than any other social group inside of the United States. Mm-hmm. Because unions have been where Black people have gone in order to collective bargain and advocate for our rights. And so what you have seen, TFA is part of the tearing down of public education in general, but specifically the teachers' unions. It's part of dismantling the collective bargaining, dismantling public utilities, and public workers, right? Because that's all part of the reformist Republican, that government is too large, it's too big, it's too wasteful in its spending. And so they're constantly cutting, but that's code word for Black people, because Black people, by and large, that's where we're workers. We're workers at the state level, the city level, the federal level, because those were safe places. the safer places where we could go and get a job at the post office, or we can go get a job in some type of public service and have our unions protect us. But this is an attack. TFA is an attack on the teachers union to dismantle or destroy it, to move closer to the full privatization of public education.
Okay. Right. So y'all just keep some of these things in mind, because we have to start going to bat policy wise. And that's why I feel like, it's almost like we keep getting, blindsided. Right. And so, I know you don't see the chat, H, but I'll just throw out, we got some folks in here from New York. We got some Chicago in here. Houston is in here. Denver is in here. So we got people, from all over the country right now. And I just think it's important for us to start recognizing that some of these things are happening. It's that they're not happening. They've happened, right? This is already descended upon us. And it's like, now what do we got to start doing to fight back?
So I just want to say that our Voice Our Schools and Breaking Our Chains is part of a national network called Journey for Justice that comes out of Chicago with the national director, G2 Brown. Journey for Justice is in 35 cities around the United States: Newark, DC, New Orleans, Oakland, LA, Houston, all of these various cities, urban areas. And so the issues that we're talking about in Denver, the same issues that are talking about in Newark, are the same issues that are happening in New York, in Chicago, Detroit, all over where Black folks are to be found. And so none of us are dealing with this in isolation, although we feel isolated. But the solution is to make sure that you're connected to a national network of education abolitionists who are about freedom fighting inside of public education. And we have to remember this, Jice, and this is the part that sometimes get lost. Public education belongs to us. It is paid by our tax dollars. There's a very good book written by a sister named Noliwe Rooks called Cutting School. And she talks about the double taxation upon Black people when we pull our children outside of public education, meaning that you are already paying for your public education. If we have to then pull our children out and educate them again, that's double taxation, meaning that there's a certain amount of resources then that have to go in. So then when you talk about the wealth gap and that exists between Black and white people, white folks aren't pulling their children out of public education, because what they do is they take over their local public education. They hire they run their people for school board. They make sure that they control their public education. And so Black people, where Black people exist, that process has been somewhat interrupted. For instance, in Detroit, it's been a state takeover. So now they got rid of the school board. Why did they get rid of the school board? Because there wasn't nothing but Black folks in Detroit. And when Black folks in Detroit said, we want to take over our public education system, we want to run our school board members, we want to run our district, then what they did is they turned it over. And so this is part and parcel of the fight.
Right.
But I just want to mention that it's a national fight.
Right. So first of all, I just dropped the Journey for Justice site in here. So if you see all the things, I just dropped that site in here. And I just want to make sure that I have the right site. It's jforjalliance.com, right?
That's us. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I just dropped that in here. I see we got Memphis, Tennessee, Atlanta in the house, Louisville, Texas, Huntsville, Texas is in the house. So, like I said, we're coming in from all over. And Michi says, if you can't change the public school system, then what part doesn't matter? Okay, well, hopefully Michi will clarify what she's saying. But
what is she saying?
She said, if you can't change the public school system, then that doesn't even matter. But I'm not sure what part doesn't matter. So clarify that for me, sis. But so I wanted to just look at, I want to tie in these different pieces, right? Because double taxation is another economic hit, right? And then these things are being done through policy. And even then, like the school board election process is or the things you have to do in order to take over your school district. These are things are outside of, like, say, the presidential election, right? And oftentimes when we talk about voting, we talk about these bigger elections, and I'm not going to say that they don't matter, but what I would say is that, on most levels, the presidential election is probably the one that doesn't affect you on a day-to-day basis like it matters for things like your school board or for your mayor or for your city council or for the people who are acting, legislation and policy that is, taking place specifically to where you are residing, right? And so we're not as active in those processes as we need to be. And I think there is, I see this push for engagement, right? A bigger push for engagement, but I think we don't necessarily always tie that into these things have been discussions, have been, like these are not necessarily happening all the time behind closed doors, right? Like these things are happening inside of public meetings that we're not attending, that are,
That's right.
are not being heard,
That's right.
that we're not coming in and rallying and, some of those things, right? And so that's kind of a little bit more of like, I think some of the work that I've seen you guys do here, where, you got Tom Boasberg removed, right? But then, so that was a win. But then the person who they replaced him with, right, that was kind of a loss because that was not who you guys were pushing for, right?
That's right.
And I think we have to remember, like, there's going to be that win and like this is a war, right? So you won one battle, you got Boasberg out, lost the next battle, but now, like, what's the next steps? Because you guys are still attending these school board meetings and you're still kind of raising a lot of hell going on over here.
Right. So what our objective is at this point is to flip the board, and what we mean by flip the board is that there's a mindset that took over in the late 90s, early 2000s around the privatization of public education. Those people are very well funded. You have to ask yourselves, when you talk about national and local, you have a figure in someone like Betsy DeVos. Betsy DeVos is a billionaire. Let me say that again. She's a billionaire with a B. Ask yourself, why is a billionaire holding a position where she's only getting paid $160,000 a year to be the Secretary of Education?
She's donating her foregoing her salary, right?
For $1. That's right. She could do it for $1. So
right.
What is the interest of a billionaire inside of public education? You could ask the same thing about Eli Broad, the billionaire out of Los Angeles that owns all the property and you can say the same thing about Bill Gates. Why are billionaires so interested in public education? The reason why billionaires are so interested in public education is because it is what is called in affluent circles the last public cash cow. And so they're all trying to milk public education in these particular ways. And so that is what we call inside of education abolitionist circles. Those people are called reformers, where they're trying to reform public education and privatize it. And so what we've had in Denver is most of the school board members, and this is what you have to understand, they got all the money. That's where the money is coming from. Billionaires and millionaires who are putting money inside of public education in order to privatize it. And so that is who has existed on Denver School Board's majority. We are now in the process of a campaign called Flip the Board 2019, where we are trying to where we're seeking and advocating and pushing and educating to get people who believe in public education and the protection of public education as the majority on the school board. And so this year in November, we have the opportunity to do that. We're running a campaign and have been running the campaign for the last 6 months called Flip the Board 2019 to get people on the school board that are for the protection and not the privatization of public education. And this is true. This is taking place all over the country.
So let's play some devil's advocate, right? Because the school system don't work for our kids anyway, right? So now so we take over the school board, right? That's one thing. But, to Michi's point, so she clarified her point. She said, keeping your kids in public school just because you pay taxes of the curriculum, the school to prison pipeline, et cetera, basically my children mean more to me than the taxes, if we're not seeing any major change, right? So I think, so I think it is important to take over our schools. But then we can't keep doing like business as usual, right? Because our school system, first of all, our school system is antiquated, right? So it's not even like up to date for keeping kids in alignment with kind of where our economy is going in the first place. but then it's also by and large very harmful to the psyche of Black children. So like, if it's not going to be a charter system that allows you to basically create what you want to create or who you want to create it for, and we do go into a reform of the public school system, but not a reform to make it privatized, keeping it public, right, but reforming it so that it's beneficial to our children, like what do you foresee that process looking like? Like, what are we talking?
So again, and again, this is why we need a deep understanding of what the issue is. So I'm not talking theory. Just this last 6 months, we took over a public school. Mm-hmm. We hired the principal that we wanted to hire. We hired the assistant principal that we wanted to hire, both Black, by the way. We hired the teachers that we wanted in the school. 85% of the teachers now in the school, Denver Discovery School, that we took over just 6 months ago, 85% of those teachers are Black and brown teachers now. The curriculum we control, and we can create what the curriculum is inside of that school. So people think that you have to understand what your freedoms are that exist. Like, what white people are doing is not magically delicious. Right? It's not just some hocus pocus. There's a mythology behind it, a methodology behind it. And we just need to understand that methodology and Blackanize it, right? And understand that we can. And so right now, as we speak, in Stapleton neighborhood, we have a school that is 85% Black, 91% free and reduced lunch. So we're talking about poor Black and brown people, or working class Black and brown people, that now has a Black principal, that now has a Black assistant principal, that now has 85% Black teachers and brown teachers of color, where now we have control over the curriculum and what's taught and what's going to be inside of that school. So along with Journey for Justice, there's what is called a community school model that is taking over, that is being implemented all around the country. In fact, Mayor Bill de Blasio has just ordered 170 New York schools to be converted into community schools. And community schools allow the community to control what happens inside of those schools, what type of curriculum is taught, what type of teachers are inside of the building, what type of administrators are inside of the building. Again, this is a public school, but it's a community public school. And so we have to just be able to hip ourselves to what is actually possible. Because the truth of the matter is, it's not possible for every Black parent. It's not even possible for 50% of Black parents to pull their children out of school and to homeschool it. It's just not. And you're talking to somebody who was my children went through homeschooling. I homeschooled my children when we were in Africa. I homeschooled them for the first 2 years that we returned to America in order to give them a soft entry point back into the schooling system. So it's not that I'm anti-homeschooling. What I'm saying is, if we're talking about how we're dealing with Black people in total, most Black people most Black people need at least 2 incomes coming into the household in order to sustain that household.
At least 2.
At least 2.
Ubering, they trying to Airbnb, they spare bedroom.
All kind of hustles. So it's just not as a solution for the masses of Black people, it is not one. So where we have to do is meet Black people with where they are, which is inside of the public education systems, and organize Black parents in such a way that they can advocate and agitate, but it requires organization first and foremost, so that you can agitate, so you know what's possible, so you know what policies that you can push for, you know what curriculums exist out there, you know what educators, that the principal that we got for our school, Jice, she's been a Black principal inside of DPS for 39 years. 39 years.
Y'all caught her on her way out. What y'all pulled that
into? She was already retired. She was already gone. She already made it up north. We told sister, yo, we need you to come back down.
Right, come back. And
so she agreed to come back and mentor
I was about to ask that too. I was like, so now where's the leadership reproduction process?
That's right.
How do we, start that train? So I'm glad that you jumped in and even said that, because that was literally getting ready to roll off my tongue.
Because that's what we need.
When we see someone who works, we got to start reproducing that.
That's right. And protecting them.
So there's Jeremy Jeremy has awakened said, are Black newly graduated teachers able to take advantage of the programs allowing them to teach in low-income school districts and have their student loans forgiven? And I'm not aware of, I mean, technically Teach for America does not say that they're for white people, right? But they're for white people. You know, I guess if I'm gonna, you know, jump in and say what I think he's alluding to is, you know, is that something that we're looking into to begin to create some of those avenues to start getting some of that student loan debt off of, you know, the backs of our teachers in that same, you know, manner and fashion, where we're being dedicated to looking at teachers that look like us.
So that's the tricky part about it. And it's tricky, and it's a very good point, right? You have a program that was set up to milk money and for privileged white people, but also if Black people are able to get into it, then they can enjoy getting some debt relief as well, and to be set inside of urban school districts. So even after the 2 years that they're set there, they can still continue on and go 5 years, 10 years, and create a career. However, it's one of those things where you work both sides against the middle, right? Because what you do as a TFA teacher is they will hire you for $31,000 a year and fire Miss Jenkins, who's been there 25, 30, 35, 40 years, because it's about McDonaldizing public education. So they get rid of all of the seasoned educators because they're too, quote unquote, too expensive to pay them for what they're worth. And then you bring in these young 23, 24, 25-year-olds to set in front of Black children, because that's generally where TFA is going, because white people ain't gonna let no 1 year. I think of it like this. If you were going to go in for brain surgery, would you want a surgeon that has only been out of medical school for a year, or would you want somebody that has performed hundreds of, maybe if not thousands of brain surgeries? They set the most inexperienced teachers in front of Black children. And so that's what TFA is about. That's why they send them into those urban areas. So we have to be very careful about how we use what these systems would give us as an individual, but take away from us as a collective.
That's a good point. Thank you, James. I appreciate that, King. You always coming in there for me. So thank you for that. So is it Yamaya? Hopefully I pronounced that right. You know, so she says our Black leaders in those positions in the public schools are hurting our children more here so she's in the Atlanta area just for money, right? And so, I mean, so this to me is something that I think gets addressed often here by you in particular, right? I actually, if y'all remember my video on Black misleadership, like I was taking that term from H, who uses that all the time, the Black misleadership class, right? But I think to me what that says is that we have to kind of get into that space of, you know, it's not like every Black face is not our friend, right? All skin folk ain't kinfolk kind of thing. And so if we do put somebody who is Black, so let me see how I want to phrase this.
I already see where your mind is going.
Huh?
I said, I already see how your mind is working on this. There's several places you can attack it from.
I'm trying to get it together.
Like, where do I want to do it? Yeah.
You know, I think that's multi-layered, right? Like, one, we have to start grooming the people that we want in these positions, and I think that's where that mentorship piece kind of comes in. And for us to have a kind of a unified, you know, idea about what it is that we want, what it is that we believe our communities need, and then there's that process of removing leadership where we struggle sometimes to remove people because they look like us, and by no means is that an entryway into the conversation on the political situation that just happened here in Denver. That's not even a part of this conversation. But I think that there is that, you know, idea that because they look like us, that means that we want them in, and we end up like looking at, you know, Black folks over policy issues, right? And I think what we need to have is both. We need to have the Black folks who are in alignment with the policy issues, and that takes a level of grooming. And then we got to be able to start pushing out those, you know, who don't fit in our picture. So I think
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
flip the board, even if the board is black, right? I mean, in Atlanta, and I don't know for
Absolutely.
sure, but if the board is black, you
It
know what I'm
is.
saying, and it's still not, you know, in Atlanta or even, you know, previously in Detroit, I don't know that how that played out before the state took it over. But if the board is black in Detroit and they're still fucking up, then we flip that board too, right? And we replace them, and they just might need to be more black faces, but maybe they
That's
need
right.
more strategic black faces.
That's right. That's right. And that's absolutely right. I have nothing to add there. That's 100% on target. That we can't rely on just the color of people. And I'm very familiar with the Atlanta school system. You have to understand, Atlanta is in the South. You're talking about a school system that was predicated upon, I mean, it's right next to the plantations. And so it's one of those cities where it's probably one of the worst school systems in the United States because it's being undermined, because most of the students inside of public education in Atlanta are Black kids.
Mm-hmm.
So they just put Black overseers.
Right. So we're rounding up here around that hour-long time, and y'all know I don't be trying to go over that. Like I mean, kind of drop in, you know, some last words here. I know there's so much more to this because really we're just kind of like, you know, getting into even just Tom Bonesberg, you know, basically to flip the board is an ongoing situation, but it was also, you know, what was that, a year ago-ish?
About a year and a half, yeah.
A year and a half, right? So I know that there's been, you know, many more steps to the journey, and so we'll have to look to have you back on, like, to finish this conversation and things. But
Sure.
you know, kind of, you know, tell us how you know what some steps are, you know, or some
So
last words.
First steps, and you know, my favorite all-time, I have two favorite all-time community organizers. The first one was Harriet Tubman. It was one of my all-time favorite community organizers.
I think she's one of everyone's all-time favorite community organizers. She was cold,
and so,
right?
Yeah, and I seek to emulate both her strategy and her vigor and vision. And my other all-time favorite community organizer is Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture. And he said that our solution is very, very simple, and it's only, we have to do three things, and we have to do these three things effectively if we ever hope or vision to make change. And that is to organize. We then have to organize, and then we have to organize. And so this is why it's important for Black people, more than any other, the most marginalized group inside of this country, to be organized. And so what we lack is not vision. We don't even lack, and you know this, it's not like we lack money. What we lack is the ability to organize ourselves in such a way that we recycle our dollars through the community 15, 16, 17, 18 times. It's not that we don't have a dollar, it's that when we get it, it stays inside of the Black community for all of a half an hour before it's left our community. So the same thing is true as far as our energy around organizing. It's not that we don't have, it's not that we don't have the solution to these issues, is that we have to organize as a collective. And so what I would implore people to do, and since you put the link inside of the chat room, is if in your city, if there is a Journey for Justice organization, for you to get in contact with that organization, and if there's not one, and if there's not one inside of your city, then create one, because it is my fervent belief that education justice is the human rights issue of our time, and if we don't begin to protect public education, which has always been seen as the great equalizer. It is how Black people haven't even moved into the middle class, came specifically from education. And so if we allow public education to fall, which is what they're doing, to privatize it, then we are cutting ourselves off from the very vehicle that made us, that made the places like Rosewood or Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, or any of our wealth circles possible. And so we have to be able to engage inside of that fight. It's our children are inside of that fight. They're being pushed inside, and we didn't even really even dig deep or even scratch really what is happening to Black children inside of the education system, as far as the criminalization and what those rates and trends look like, which are highly dismal. So,
right. As I said, we'll have to have you back on, and you know, and even potentially, if she's open to it, putting her on the spot. You know, we need to pull Michi in on that conversation too, because I think that is an important part of the conversation. And sometimes an hour just doesn't do it, you know, for us to really dig into that, because that's a whole nother layer, you know, to the conundrum of education. I want to just shout out real quick, Everybody Hates Angel, because I just started following this brother. I've actually seen a few of his videos. It was a while ago, and then they were brought back to light. And while I still in here, I'm going to throw out that we're hoping to connect with you in Brooklyn, brother. Like, just know that the Black Agenda would like to connect with you. But you know, so he actually just posted in here. He said, as a teacher, you're limited to what you can do. They will stop you. The curriculum is strict. And as a teacher myself, I know I'm limited in what I'm allowed to teach my students in the school system. And I know my sisters talked about that. And I think that's, again, that's another place where we need to advocate for in policy and legislation, because teachers did have, you know, and I think it's that battle between trying to find how you like standardize something, right? Which I think inside of a lot of the community models, they're actually saying we need to stop standardizing this, right? That's part of what makes the homeschool model such a you know, fast track type of model is, you know, I'll use my daughter as an example. When I pulled her out of the school system, my daughter was, you know, on paper, they said she was on grade level, right? Which maybe means that she tested on a day she was feeling good, right? But we started to see, for math, for math. So anyway, we started to see some breakdowns in areas where I thought, well, there's some things that you need to kind of, you know, strengthen up on in the basics. Like you're not adding quickly, you're not subtracting quickly, multiplication, division, those, you know, basics, right, weren't happening you know, at kind of this rapid level. So we really took some steps back. And it wasn't, you know, I didn't tell her like, we're taking, you know, back to third grade or fourth grade. It was just, let's start you here. Let's move this forward. And I think that those individualized, you know, plans that, you know, that helps, right? And then we know there's a whole lot of other things to that, because funding likes to have data and statistics, right? So it's like finding those balances in between there. But there was a time when teachers had more control over what they taught in their classrooms, and then, you know, that was kind of sometimes an issue of now whether or not you have a quality teacher, right? Because if you have a really quality teacher that you know your child is getting something, then you can have a really shitty teacher. So when you didn't have that base level or that standardization, it allowed for a different, you know, different quality. And I think obviously there's still that quality piece, but they tried to standardize it through the curriculum that was being taught. But then that also took away the teacher's ability to really, you know, make sure that the class was on track, or, you know, that there was like a medium in there. So,
yes, all of that, and to this brother's point, the reason why that's happening for him is because of the push to privatize public education, because the people that create these tests are getting paid millions and millions upon billions of dollars in order to institute these curriculums inside of these school systems. So this is why it's important, again, that we take them over. And if there's going to be a curriculum, if there's somebody that's going to write a curriculum, then let it be a Black company, a Black business that comes and sells its curriculum to a school district or to a group of schools inside of a district that are predominantly Black, and say, listen, we want to purchase. It's a business.
Right.
And until we understand the business of school, and this is, you know, this really speaks to your lane. Until we understand the business of school, we won't understand what's happening in schools and why those decisions are being made and why you can't teach outside of the curriculum. We won't understand it. But again, I want that teacher to understand, first of all, I understand his challenges there.
Mm-hmm.
Once you close that school door, that class is yours, and he probably knows exactly what I'm talking about. So yeah, you can say what you're doing, but once you close the door, it's just you and those students. But what he's talking about is part and parcel of the privatization of public education.
Right. And so I'm just, so I'm gonna just kind of, because he threw out some other things here. So he said homeschooling is the way forward. There's so many race-based issues with schooling that are hard to get around. Technically, you can't have a Black-only school, but you can have a Catholic school. Then he says, when you have a Pan-African school, you can't by law reject a student for being non-Black. This, however, causes issues with the entire Pan-African doctrine and premise, right? So now what I'm gonna throw out there is, look, now we need to just have a round table because, like, let's pull you in. Let's put Michi says she's up for that. You know what I'm saying? But I think that's a that's a strong conversation. And then, like I said, for those of you that aren't following Everybody Hates Angel, I would go over. Brother has his link in there, or drop your link, brother, if you can. But go over and follow him also, because he's dropping some real solid knowledge. Like I'm really loving his channel, and there's so many videos for me to like go back and like binge watch on. So that's somebody who I'm now following. And then I'm saying, if y'all not following him, go and follow that brother. He's talking some good shit. So maybe that's something that we can arrange to do, like a roundtable, because I think this conversation, I mean, it needs more, right? It needs more. And I know we can't, encompass everything here today, but at the end of the day, it absolutely needs to have, more of a context. And, maybe we could do that on his platform, or even on Michi's platform, because both of them have larger platforms than what I have. So I'm actually kind of honored that he came over here. Like, that's what's up.
That's what's up. Moving and shaking.
So those are larger platforms. They have a bigger reach than I have. I'm growing my platform, so y'all go ahead and subscribe and share all this information. Y'all do that. Let me throw my plug in. But H, I want to make sure that I drop in the description your information. Like, this conversation is just, I think it's dope. Let people know how to reach you. Let people know how to find, more about your organization. And one more time, I'm gonna also drop in the link for Journey for Justice. I'm dropping that in once again, and I'll add that in the description as well.
So the best way to reach me is through Facebook, on the Our Voice, Our Schools page, or my personal page, Hasira Ashemu. And those are the best ways to do it, to contact me. And again, that's Our Voice, Our Schools. I will just close with, there's a book that I'm reading now by a sister named Dr. Bettina Love. And I'm going to highly recommend this book to anybody that is watching right now. It's an amazing book. And it's a sister who's coming out of the education abolitionist movement, which of course I'm a part of. And the book is an incredible read, and it talks about all of it. It touches on a lot of the issues that we talked about. So I would again ask people to go out and get that book, form book clubs around that book. Again, the name of the book is We Want to Do More Than Just Survive, by Dr. Bettina Love, and she's out of Florida A&M FAMU. Or Georgia, I'm sorry. She's out of Georgia.
So I'll drop that book as well inside the description. I just dropped the Our Voice, Our Schools link as well inside the chat. I dropped the Journey for Justice link inside the chat. So there's definitely a lot in there, and we'll make sure all those links as well are in the description after this. So, yo, H, I appreciate you coming on, man. Like, I appreciate the support, and all of that. And so we'll circle back around and have a deeper conversation around that criminalization piece as well, because I think that is certainly an area that we need to touch on, and it directly falls inside of what we're doing with the Black Agenda. So you guys know we have our 5 areas that we're touching in the Black Agenda: the physical attack that we're under, economic attack, education attack, political attack, and the mental attack that we're under, right? And when we're looking at the school system, it is a big mixture, from the brutality that our kids are physically facing to the miseducation, how this is, big business at this point, right? How the policy and legislation piece has to happen that is happening, that is pushing these initiatives, and of course the mental conditioning that's happening to our children as a part of this process. So education is something that is just all encompassing, and we really have to make sure we talk about that. So I'm going to wrap up that to say, make sure that you are getting your ticket to the Black Agenda on Tour. We are coming to a city near you. We are discussing these things. We are also discussing solutions at this tour. You can go and text Black Agenda to 484848. You can go to the blackagendaontour.com, and you can make sure that you purchase your ticket there. But there's also ways that you can get involved. You can sponsor. We definitely need that. You can donate. You can also sign up to be a vendor if that's something you're interested in. If you want to volunteer at the event near you, you can go ahead and get signed up for that as well, and our team will reach out. So there's multiple ways for us to get involved in this as a community, but you can head over to the BlackAgendaOnTour.com. That information is in there. And then, of course, again, you guys, you know how to get in touch with me, the Black Business Initiative, BBIProfessional.com, Patreon, and Grind with Jice. Again, subscribe and share. And I just want to thank everybody for joining with us this afternoon. Y'all know I'm going to be back on Thursday with my girl Michi X, and we are going to be talking about toxic femininity. I know that's going to be a triggering conversation for some of y'all, but that's what we're getting ready to talk about, is toxic femininity. So y'all make sure that you subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you can tune back in with us.
For real, I'll tune into that shit right there.
You're tuning into that. Yes, so hopefully you're subscribed as well. And so tune into that conversation on toxic femininity with me and Michi X. And so we're going to have that conversation. It's actually one that's been coming for a long time. So we got all type of, stuff that we finna wrap into that conversation. And that'll be happening on Thursday here at 3 p.m. Mountain, 5 p.m. Eastern. So all right, y'all. Nope, this is not, Boyce is not affiliated. Nope, we're gonna cut that out. No, Boyce is no longer affiliated with this tour. I guess I'll suffice to say that. All right, y'all. Thank you again, and y'all have a great.
Love you, Jice.
Tune in to my girl Michi. She comes on here in a few hours, and we'll see you then. Peace.
Peace.